Tonight on Primetime, Trump threatens to unleash hell if Iran doesn't reopen the Strait of Hormuz by Tuesday. Tehran says the waterway will never return to its previous state and has vowed to retaliate. More threats, more deadlines, still no sign of peace. Good evening. The European Council President is urging a diplomatic solution to ease tensions in the Middle East. Now, he warns that attacks on energy and civilian infrastructure are illegal and would harm the population. A News' Ross Cullen reports.
Well, we've had a statement this Monday from the President of the European Council, Antonio Costa, who is calling once again for mediation, for de-escalation, saying that a diplomatic solution is the only way to bring about an end to the crisis in the Middle East. In his statement, he goes on to say that any targeting of energy facilities would be illegal and unacceptable, the targeting of civilian infrastructure. He says that the Iranian population is the main victim of the Iranian regime, and the population would also be the main victim of a widening of the military campaign. He has said that he's regularly urged Iran to fully reopen the Strait of Hormuz and to stop attacks on its neighbours. We have seen more drone attacks reported on Monday against the United Arab Emirates and against Saudi Arabia. Now, all of this comes just one day before the expiration of the latest deadline set by the United States. Iran has until 8 p.m. Eastern Time, so New York time, on Tuesday to fully reopen the Strait of Hormuz or face what President Trump said would be hell, attacks on all of Iran's power plants, all of Iran's bridges. He says that he would be minded to, quote, blow up everything. Now, there is the possibility of mediation because we understand that Egyptian, Turkish and Pakistani mediators have sent a proposal to Washington and to Tehran to try to establish a ceasefire, and that would be the way forward then to potentially hold peace talks. That is something that the European Union has been calling for from the start. It has not engaged militarily in this war, but it would like to see the Strait of Hormuz open as soon as possible, and of course it would like to see a diplomatic solution as quickly as possible as well. Ross Cullen, A News, Brussels.
Ross Cullen reporting there. We're going to take a quick break now, but we'll be back very soon where we'll get more into the detail of this issue. Do stay with us. A very warm welcome back wherever you're watching Primetime. Now, Andy Mioch is here with the very latest business news stories. Andy, what have you got on the agenda tonight?
Well, Guy, we'll be taking a look at how oil prices are responding to the latest news out of the Middle East. There are some warnings from the largest bank in the United States regarding inflation and interest rates, some news on offshore drilling in Africa, as well as the auto industry. So let's have a look. First up, oil prices saw choppy trading at the start of the week after U.S. President Donald Trump threatened to destroy critical infrastructure in Iran unless it allows ships to cross the Strait of Hormuz. Brent crude rose above $110 a barrel before those gains eased after a report of U.S.-Iran talks over a potential ceasefire.
Oil prices fell Monday as mediators sought to broker a ceasefire between the U.S. and Iran. The U.S. West Texas Intermediate contract for May dropped about 1% to $110 per barrel by 8:19 a.m. Eastern Time. International benchmark Brent crude prices were little changed at $108 per barrel. The US, Iran and regional mediators are discussing a possible 45-day ceasefire that could lead to a permanent end of the war, four sources with knowledge of the talks told Axios. US President Donald Trump has given Iran until Tuesday to open the Strait of Hormuz or face attacks on its power plants and bridges. Trump warned Sunday in an expletive-filled social media post that Iran would be, quote, living in hell if they do not open the strait, threatening to bomb the country's power plants and bridges. Trump subsequently posted Tuesday 8 p.m. Eastern Time without further explanation. Iran has effectively kept the strait closed through attacks on oil tankers. The sea route connects the Persian Gulf to world markets. About 20% of global supplies passed through the strait before the war. The closure of the strait has triggered the largest oil supply disruption in history. Crude, jet fuel, diesel and gasoline prices have surged since the war started. The 8 members of OPEC Plus on Sunday agreed to increase production by 206,000 barrels per day in May, though it is unclear how the oil will reach the global market with the strait still closed.
The CEO of the largest bank in the United States warned in an annual letter to shareholders that inflation could be rising instead of continuing to fall. JP Morgan's chief executive said the wars in Ukraine and Iran impact nations far beyond their borders, namely in terms of energy prices.
JP Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon warned on Monday that the war in Iran risks oil and commodity price shocks that could keep inflation sticky and push interest rates higher than the market now expects. The warning came in an annual letter to shareholders, a day after US President Donald Trump ratcheted up pressure on Iran, threatening to target its power plants and bridges on Tuesday if it does not reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Dimon, who has run JP Morgan, the largest US bank, for 2 decades, also said the private credit sector probably does not present a systemic risk, despite investors' recent moves to pull back from such funds amid worries that advances in AI will hurt underlying borrowers. Dimon said the US economy continued to be resilient, with consumers still earning and spending, though with some recent weakening, and businesses are still healthy. But he cautioned the economy had been fueled by large amounts of government deficit spending and past stimulus, while increased expenditure on infrastructure remained a growing need.
Over in Africa, Somalia says it's ready to launch its inaugural offshore drilling operations in cooperation with Turkey. A Turkish drilling vessel is expected to arrive to Somali waters by the end of the week.
Somalia says it is ready to begin its first offshore oil drilling operations, with a Turkish government-owned drilling ship expected to arrive off its coast on Friday. The move follows the successful completion of seismic surveys last year by a Turkish research vessel. In a post on X, Somalia's petroleum minister described the move toward what would be the country's first offshore drilling as a historic milestone. The Foreign Ministry said if the drilling were to be successful, it would unlock offshore oil reserves and support the country's economic recovery as a regional energy player. The Turkish Petroleum Corporation's drilling ship, Chara Bay, is on its first international mission, heading into Somalia's territorial waters in the Arabian Sea. It will carry out deep water drilling at sites identified by recent surveys that mapped the country's hydrocarbon potential. The two countries formalized their cooperation in 2024 through a production sharing agreement.
Finance ministers of Germany, Austria, Italy, Portugal and Spain have reportedly called for an EU tax on the windfall profits being made by energy companies amid the Iran war. The conflict has sent oil and gas prices soaring, boosting profits for energy companies but burdening consumers.
5 European Union countries are calling for a windfall tax on energy companies' profits in reaction to rising fuel prices due to the Iran war, according to a letter from finance ministers to the EU Commission seen by Reuters. The finance ministers of Germany, Italy, Spain, Portugal and Austria made the joint call for an EU-wide tax in a letter dated Friday. Such a measure could help fund relief for consumers in the face of high energy prices, they said. The ministers wrote that it would make it possible to finance temporary relief, especially for consumers, and curb rising inflation, without placing additional burdens on public budgets. Oil and gas prices have spiked since the US-Israeli strikes on Iran began on February 28th, creating a price shock similar to the energy crisis Europe went through after Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, even though EU countries are now getting more energy from renewable sources. In the letter addressed to the EU Climate Commissioner, The ministers pointed to a similar emergency tax in 2022 to address high energy prices. A spokesperson for the EU Commission confirmed it had received the letter and that it was assessing it. The letter gave no details of what level of windfall tax the ministers were proposing or on which companies it should fall.
Onto the auto industry, the U.S. car safety regulator has closed its investigation into Tesla's Actually Smart Summon feature after documenting 159 incidents, all involving minor property damage. The agency found 0 injuries and 0 fatalities linked to the feature and determined that Tesla's software updates adequately addressed the issues.
The US auto safety regulator said on Monday it has closed its probe into Tesla's Actually Smart Summon feature, covering about 2.5 million vehicles, after finding it was linked only to low-speed incidents with no injuries or fatalities. The feature allows users to remotely move vehicles over short distances in parking areas or private property, using a smartphone app while maintaining continuous supervision. The agency concluded that the feature was linked primarily to low-speed incidents resulting in minor property damage, with no reported injuries or fatalities. Most of the reported incidents involved vehicles striking obstacles such as parked cars, garage doors, or gates, often early in a summon session when visibility or situational awareness was limited, according to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. However, the agency noted that closing the probe does not mean that a safety-related defect did not exist, and said it reserves the right to take further action if warranted. Tesla has addressed the identified issues through a series of over-the-air software updates aimed at improving obstacle detection, camera blockage identification, and vehicle response to dynamic objects, such as gates, the regulator said.
And finally, with a little over 2 months left until the FIFA World Cup in the US, Canada, and Mexico, football fever has already started across the globe. China's Shenzhen, for example, saw a surge in the sales of new TVs.
Trade-in subsidies in the upcoming World Cup soccer competition are encouraging people in southern China's Shenzhen city to purchase new TVs. A salesperson at one shop in the city says consumers are taking the upcoming sporting event into consideration as they make their selections.
The sales of this February increased by 15% compared to January. Many consumers came in and asked which television is the best for watching the World Cup.
Sales staff in another store in the city said features like anti-reflective screens and wall mounts are helping drive sales. They said sales this month are expected to be 20% higher than last month and could keep increasing until the start of the competition in June.
And that is a wrap on the business brief for tonight. Back to you, Guy.
Andy, we're watching more on our phones, aren't we? But still it seems TVs are as popular as ever.
Yeah, call me old-fashioned, but I prefer a bigger screen than a smartphone.
Me too. Thank you, Andy. After the break, rising tensions in the Persian Gulf with new threats looming, deadlines and fears of a wider conflict. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Primetime. Now, rising tensions in the Middle East continue to impact global energy markets, with growing concern over supply and shipping routes as producers monitor the situation closely. Here's the latest.
In a virtual meeting on Sunday, the OPEC Plus group, including Saudi Arabia, Russia, and several other key producers, confirmed it will raise output by 206,000 barrels per day from May. The group said it had reviewed market conditions and stressed the need to keep key shipping routes open, warning disruptions could affect global supply. It also raised concerns about attacks on energy infrastructure, noting repairs can be costly and slow. The announcement comes as tensions in the Middle East continue to escalate. Since late February, conflict involving US and Israeli strikes on Iran has significantly reduced the flow of crude oil and refined products across the region. Oil prices have responded to those supply concerns. On Monday, Brent crude rose by $1.71, reaching around $110.74 a barrel. Meanwhile, US crude gained 71 cents, trading at roughly $112.25 per barrel. last week saw even sharper increases, with prices recording their biggest jump since 2020 amid fears of further disruption. A key concern remains the Strait of Hormuz, a crucial route for oil exports from several major producers, which has been largely restricted due to ongoing attacks on shipping. While some vessels are still managing to pass through, many buyers are now turning to alternative sources, including supplies from the United States and the North Sea. OPEC Plus is expected to meet again on the 3rd of May to reassess the situation as uncertainty in global energy markets continues.
Well, with oil prices climbing and supply routes under pressure, let's bring in now our guest, Kostas Geropoulos, Director of Energy, Climate Policy and Security at Eni Global Media. He's joining us from Athens in Greece. Kostas, very good indeed to have you with us. Goodness me, just an ongoing anxiety-inducing situation for analysts, this, isn't it? Is the situation more or less scary for the global economy, do you think, than it was a week ago?
I think we have a whiplash. I mean, we're going back and forth, especially with the latest comments coming in from the President Trump and the deadline approaching, although, it has been shifting quite a bit. So as long as the Strait of Hormuz remains closed, and just the idea that it may stay longer up until the middle of May or even longer, and there's damage in the infrastructure, that rattles markets. Now, you'd mentioned earlier in the report that OPEC was meeting actually and discussed about the releasing 206,000 barrels. The countries meeting, there were actually only 8 countries that have been meeting virtually. As you mentioned, Saudi Arabia, it's OPEC Plus, so it's also Russia, Iraq, Kuwait, Kazakhstan, Oman, and Algeria. But the decision is largely symbolic, because as long as the strait remains closed, this is just an indication that, and the willingness to calm markets, that those countries are ready to increase output once the situation stabilizes and the strait is open. Now, there are other alternatives also as well, because but we know that, for example, that Russia also doesn't, there's sanctions, and there's also the infrastructure is damaged by the war with Ukraine. Also, there's already some damage on the infrastructure in the Middle East. So, and we're talking about 2% largely from the oil disrupted that's going to be released. So, this is just a good move, a move of willingness and symbolic to the markets.
So the OPEC Plus move symbolic then. What does happen in terms of the economic shock, the economic, what are the sort of medium-term implications economically if this blocking of the Strait of Hormuz just simply continues over an indefinite period?
Well, I saw some reports today that tankers that actually had passed the Straits of Hormuz, heading to Asia before the attacks on Iran and before this whole thing erupted, are actually just arriving. Some of them now still in the markets. So the market's still supplied, but there's as you mentioned, the concern is how long this is going to take. I saw a report from JP Morgan that said that if the strait remains closed until mid-May, that we're going to see $150 per barrel oil price. So the situation is very, and it's not just oil, it's fertilizers, it's also natural gas. I mean, this whole thing affects the whole economy. So the situation is very much. I also think that Iran is a member of OPEC, and I think this is also a signal from its fellow oil producers that it's just a warning that if Iran is considering to retaliate, and if the situation that right now all the OPEC members are united, And they also issued a statement, which basically is a reiteration of what they said at the 65th meeting, that maritime routes have to be protected and remain open, and also that infrastructure has to be protected and not be attacked. So I think this is also a signal to Iran, but also in the global economy, and as well as to the U.S. and Israel, that that all these countries remain united. But in terms of actual oil reaching the market, I mean, as we discussed, it's mostly symbolic.
And just give us an insight, Costas, into what's actually happening in the market. Are they reacting to real supply shortages, or is this mainly fear and uncertainty, do you think?
At this point, I think it's mostly fear, and it's also, we've seen some markets and some countries already like trying to have measures in terms of, reducing consumption and taking some steps, in terms of if that continues. But at this point, I think it's mostly psychological, and we have seen that how the markets and the oil price is moving with the statements from the White House. I mean, we've seen like really big swings in the oil price. So at this point, this is a lot of fear. But in terms of long-term supply, even if the situation is resolved, like in the next couple of days, it would still take some time, to have the guarantees and for tankers to be feeling secure to cross the straits. And also there has been some damage on infrastructure already. So, this is going to take a while, I think. But the first step is to have this crisis resolved as soon as possible. And we've seen, steps taken also, the latest peace initiative that we saw that been discussed on both sides. But the markets are very volatile, but also in the long term, I mean, countries have also been looking at alternative supplies. They've been looking at switch to renewables, and so this is going to, I think, shift the focus long term also in terms of those countries.
Let's just talk a bit more, if it's okay, about that longer term picture, because do you think there's a sense in which this could fundamentally change the sort of the value chain, the supply chain, when it comes to energy for good, forever? I mean, could it trigger a longer term shift in where countries fundamentally source their energy?
Yeah, and we have already experiencing that, because I mean, we had also the war with Ukraine, and we've seen also the long term, the shift to energy transition, but also new supply routes and new diversification. So, again, I'll be coming back to Baku for the Baku Energy Forum at the beginning of June, and we've seen like already, for example, in Central Asia, that there is a increased, in addition to gas supply, to also have electrification cables to the green energy corridor to Europe. We also see how interconnectors are very important now within the EU, so that every country is not on its own. So I think the UK is looking more back into the North Sea. The nuclear is also back, especially small reactors, are being discussed a lot more now. So I think this shift, this is one more crisis, and in addition to what the situation with Russia and Ukraine, that is going, I think, will shift how countries look at the way they're getting their energy. So, also new alliances. We've seen, how concerned Asia is, and especially China and Japan, that rely on supplies from the Gulf, especially natural gas. So I think every country is going to look at its alliances, and also strategically thinking in terms of energy security. So I think energy security is as important as energy transition. But I think this is going to be a focus, so for sure. We're going to probably see that also in Bangkok, when we have the gas tech in the beginning of September. They've already, there's a shift already in the way the country is looking at the way they're looking at their energy. And, energy security is becoming as important as energy supplies.
Kostas, we thank you very much indeed for your analysis. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you, Guy.
Okay, we're going to take a short break now. When we come back, plenty more news and analysis. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Primetime. Hamas's armed wing said discussing the group's disarmament before Israel fully implements the first phase of the US-brokered Gaza ceasefire was an attempt to continue what it called a genocide against the Palestinian people. Now, in a televised statement, Hamas's armed wing spokesperson Abu Ubaidah said raising the issue of weapons in a crude manner would not be accepted. US President Donald Trump's Board of Peace Plan for Gaza calls for disarmament to reinforce last October's ceasefire. Well, 7 people are killed in an Israeli strike on Farhata, including a 4-year-old child. Well, the attack coming after residents had been told to leave. Elsewhere, another strike on Beirut killed 4 people and injured 39, according to Lebanon's health ministry. It came as Lebanese Christians marked Easter Sunday in what was reported to be one of the most intense days of fighting since Israel expanded its war aims just over a month earlier. Now, with tensions rising again around the Gaza ceasefire and violence escalating on multiple fronts, let's bring in now Daoud Kuttab, the distinguished Palestinian journalist who is closely following the situation. Daoud, very good indeed to have you. Thank you very much for joining us on Primetime. This situation, it's clearly something that has been confounding analysts. It's been over 3 decades since you famously interviewed an Israeli prime minister. How does this moment compare? And is there still hope at all for a 2-state solution?
Well, in 1993, I did interview former Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, and he was very optimistic, as many of us were, about the Oslo process. Unfortunately, since he was killed by an Israeli radical Jew and Netanyahu became the prime minister, Israel has moved in a more radical way against the peace process. At times, Netanyahu was giving lip service to peace, but now we know that he was always against the idea of a 2-state solution. He was against the idea of Israel ending its occupation. And now we're seeing genocide happening in Gaza, war crimes happening in Gaza, and Israelis are refusing to entertain their own agreement with America of the ceasefire agreement, which was approved by the Security Council. That agreement calls for second phase, allowing the Rafah crossing to be open, allowing humanitarian aid, and allowing the Palestinian non-Hamas committee to enter Gaza. Israel has refused to do all that. They have refused to allow humanitarian aid at the level that was accepted, 600 trucks a day. Now only 150 trucks enter. And the Palestinian Technocrat Committee is still stuck in Gaza, in Cairo, Egypt. The Israelis are not allowing them, and they're demanding a unilateral disengagement or disarmament of Hamas. For 2 years, Israel tried everything possible to get Hamas to take out their weapons, and they failed. And now they want Hamas to give up their weapons without anything in return. Hamas is willing to negotiate, but it requires, it takes 2 to tango, and Israelis don't want to withdraw from Gaza. They don't want to open up Gaza and the Rafah crossing. And so now Palestinians are stuck in Gaza, and the Israelis are doing nothing because the Americans are too busy in their unilateral war with Israel against Iran.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you more about that, Hamas. It's very interesting, this, because, of course, they have rejected disarmament. But it seems to be, from what you're saying, that your analysis is that it's almost strategically impossible for them to have done anything other than that.
Yes, I mean, I think they have not rejected disarmament. They've said that let's negotiate, let's talk about how we disarm. What, who do we give the weapons to? What kind of weapons are we talking about? What guarantees about our safety will be required? Would Israel withdraw? Israel is still occupying 50% of Gaza. Will Israel agree to withdraw? So they want to do a deal where they will give up some weapons and Israel will make some kind of withdrawal and so on and so forth. Until now, the Israelis are not interested in any kind of a cooperation, and the Americans are not pushing them because Americans are involved in this stupid war against Iran with Israel and their allies. So everything seems to be on hold until that war ends.
And strategically, I mean, you have a long and distinguished track record of analysing this whole situation. What is your sense of the Israeli mindset at this point? What is their strategy now? When you look at the strikes in Gaza, you look at the strikes in Beirut, what does that signal to you about their latest strategy?
Well, I'm not sure we can talk about Israeli strategy because we don't see an Israeli strategy. We see a Netanyahu strategy. And Netanyahu is wanted for 4 corruption cases. He's wanted by the International Criminal Court. His party might lose the coming elections in October of this year. And so for him, keeping the war going, whether it's in Iran, whether it's in Gaza, whether it's in Lebanon, keeps him in power. He doesn't want the war to end. The moment the war in Gaza ends, there will be an investigative committee which will find him guilty of what happened on October 7th. So Netanyahu and people who are supporting him in his party don't want this war to end, or the Iran war to end, or the Lebanon situation to end. And that's unfortunate because that's not going to bring peace. The Israelis have no real strategy in Gaza. They don't, on the one hand, they say they don't want to occupy it forever. They don't want to settle Gaza, but at the same time, they're refusing to negotiate or deal with Gaza. They also refuse to negotiate with the moderate Palestinian leadership in Ramallah. So, we always ask the Israelis, what do you want? What are your plans? How do you want to find a solution with your neighbors, the Palestinians? Because we're not going anywhere. The Israelis are not going anywhere. So we have to either share the power or share the land. And now it seems that sharing the land, the two-state solution, is the most acceptable solution for the entire global world. 160 countries have recognized Palestine. And it's time for the Israelis to understand that they cannot ethnically cleanse Palestine. They have to deal with the Palestinians sooner or later.
What is it that you think is going to break that stalemate then? Is it more pressure on Israel, or is it a way, whether it's via a back channel or some other route, a way of increasing the dialogue?
Well, I think 2 things need to change. I think the Israeli public, which is starting to move away from Netanyahu, needs to get themselves together and finally end his reign in next October elections. But also the U.S. needs to mean what they say and say what they mean. They created a 20-point plan, yet they're not really putting any pressure on Israel to carry out that plan. Now they're busy with Iran, but they should find ways to get the Israelis to honor their commitments, and it's a Security Council resolution. So the whole world has actually agreed to Trump's plan, but nobody's actually putting pressure on Israel to carry out its part of the deal.
And finally, Professor, I just wanted to ask you about the role of international mediators. We hear a lot about the role that other actors can and should or could play. What realistically is the role, if any, for international mediators at this point?
I don't think that we have in the present situation anybody in the world that can do anything with the Netanyahu government except President Trump. President Trump, unfortunately, is the only game in town. And what we need to do is for Trump to actually create the right atmosphere to get the ball rolling and to get the Israelis to withdraw from Gaza and from some kind of a deal with Hamas to be agreed to. Right now, mediators are nice people, but they will not do anything to convince the Israelis and the Netanyahu administration to end and their war and their occupation of Gaza.
Professor Kutab, we thank you very much indeed for your analysis and for joining us on Prime Time. Thank you. Okay, going back to the US and Israel-Iran conflict with its escalating tensions and rapidly growing risks. Let's now bring in our first guest, David Rosenthal, political scientist who's joining us live from Bogota in Colombia. David, very good indeed to have you with us. Just very interesting there speaking to the professor about this. Just give us your sense, please, outline your analysis of the current situation.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, the current situation between Israel, Iran, America, and also the Arab world is about a simple topic. Now we are talking about Hormuz. So Trump wants that Hormuz be liberated, be open, reopened. And of course, the government of US and the government of Israel, they want that with peace, a ceasefire peace. I think this of the war can have soon finish if all of that, all of the Iranians missiles, all the Iranian, all the attacks from Iran disappear, will be finished. But the regime of the Ayatollah, of course, the new Ayatollah, all of the regime of Iran, they want to continue the war. So in this case, I think that in the other hand, we have a war that can be worse.
It's very interesting. We're having one or two technical issues hearing you, but I do want to stay with you because it's very important to get your analysis on this. I just wanted to reflect on what we've seen over the last few weeks. We keep hearing the intense, threatening rhetoric, but at the same time from the US, we're also hearing these continual statements that suggest that a deal is very close to being done. I mean, one wonders how long that sort of situation can continue for. Who do you think is winning this war at this point?
I think that anyone is winning the war now, but Israel and US are making an important job. Also, you can see that the popularity of President Trump in America is going down. Netanyahu also has a bad popularity. So they are making for them a big problem now with this position. But I think that also it's important to continue supporting the people of Iran, that they are fighting against the regime. So it's important to continue with them because I think in this case it's really significant that Iran can be in freedom, no? So Israel and America, they have a commitment with the people of Iran also.
And if these threats by President Trump, if these infrastructure strikes do actually happen, what is your sense in terms of whether that could spiral the war into something even more significant, even more devastating than we've already seen?
Unfortunately, I think this can happen. This war, I don't think that will finish very soon. I don't think that this war will finish tomorrow. So it's very possible that the war has a new escalate and all of these things in war. So it's a shame, but it's the reality. And also as the prophecies and all the analysis of a lot of important thinkers from now and from the past, they talk about this war, that at the end Israel will be attacked by a lot of countries, even countries that we can't believe now.
And also wanted to ask you as well about the latest killing of the IRGC commander that has occurred. Your reaction to that, please, and is there a particular significance attached to that?
Yeah, Israel killed, a lot of people. In this case, they are like, people that work with the regime of Iran, the IRC, and all of these is enemies. They are public enemies of Israel, and Israel, they pray for the destroying of Israel and the US. So in this case, I think Israel will continue killing a lot of these important members of the cabinet, but at the end, maybe they will decide to negotiate with one of them. But, the important now is that Iran don't disturb anymore to the people. So for this, I think more of these members of these, like you can say, also terrorist organization will be down.
Well, we're very glad indeed that we got the connection back. We appreciate your analysis very much indeed. Thank you once again for joining us on Prime Time.
Thank you, dear.
Okay, after the break, a suspected sabotage attempt targeting a key gas pipeline in Central Europe raises fresh security concerns. Do stay with us. A warm welcome back to Prime Time, wherever you're watching. Now, security concerns are rising around critical energy infrastructure in Central Europe as authorities respond to a potential threat with wider implications for regional stability. The development comes at a sensitive political moment, adding to existing tensions across the region. Here's the latest.
Hungary has tightened security around a key gas pipeline after explosives were discovered near its route in northern Serbia, raising concerns over a possible sabotage attempt just days before a pivotal national election. Prime Minister Viktor Orbán said an emergency meeting of Hungary's Defence Council was convened following reports from Serbian authorities. The devices were found near the Balkan Stream section of the Turk Stream network, close to the Hungarian border. While stopping short of assigning blame, Orbán said the incident reflects broader efforts to disrupt Russian energy supplies to Europe, pointing to tensions involving Ukraine.
I would not further damage Ukrainian-Hungarian relations by accusing any country without knowing the facts. However, what we are experiencing fits into a series of events, and the Ukrainians have the ability and willingness to carry out such actions.
Kyiv denied any involvement. Ukraine's foreign ministry said it categorically rejects any link to the incident and suggested it could be a staged provocation. The Kremlin also weighed in, with spokesperson Dmitry Peskov calling the situation potentially very dangerous.
We
know that sections of the Turk Stream and Blue Stream infrastructure have repeatedly come under attack. At the same time, there is still no conclusive evidence about who is behind attempts to target this critical energy artery.
Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić confirmed that security forces uncovered powerful explosives with detonators near the pipeline. No injuries were reported, and it remains operational. The Turk Stream pipeline is a key route supplying Russian gas to Central and Eastern Europe via Turkey and the Balkans. Orbán said it provides around 60% of Hungary's gas, underlining its importance to national energy security. Authorities in Hungary and Serbia have increased surveillance and protection along the pipeline, while investigations continue into the suspected sabotage attempt.
Okay, to help us unpack what this could mean, not just for Hungary, Serbia and Bulgaria, but for the wider region, I'm joined in the studio now by our very own Katie Wilson, who's been following this closely for us. Katie, good to see you there. There's a lot going on, Katie, isn't there? And as you say, there have been things going on for quite a while, the rumours of false flag operations, election pressure coming into play too. Just give us a sense of the sequence, the background of events that led up to this incident.
Yeah, and that's to do with essentially why this is getting so much attention and why this is quite significant, as Hungary for a long time has had a very unusual position within the European Union when it comes to Russian energy. Since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, as we know, the EU's been pushing to cut its dependence on Russian oil and gas. But Hungary has been the clear outlier. Under Viktor Orban, Budapest has consistently resisted those efforts and argued that switching away from Russian supplies too quickly would cause serious economic damage at home. And as a result, Hungary still relies heavily on Russian imports, and Orban has built much of his domestic political messaging around keeping those energy prices low by maintaining ties with Moscow. And that's the important context here for this latest incident, because anything that threatens those pipelines is immediately politically sensitive. We've already seen disruptions earlier this year with the Druzhba pipeline, with Hungary complaining that that was interrupted, something Kyiv is saying was due to Russian strikes, but in Budapest that was framed very differently as deliberate pressure from Ukraine. So now that explosive seems to have been discovered in the Turk Stream route in neighbouring Serbia, it feeds directly into this existing narrative that we're hearing from the Hungarian government, that its energy lifelines are under threat from external actors. And at the same time, it's all coming into the backdrop of this very tense election campaign, where Orban has long been arguing that Hungary's ability to stay out of the war in Ukraine and keep energy affordable is depending on maintaining these relations with Russia, something the opposition totally disagrees with.
Well, the tension's been there for some time. Of course, we're going to find out soon, aren't we, the result, because the elections are coming on Sunday. What are the polls actually saying, Katie?
Well, the latest polling suggests that this election is far tighter than anything Viktor Orban has faced in years. For the first time in over a decade, there are real questions about whether the EU's longest-serving leader can hold on to power. Most independent surveys now show the opposition, led by Peter Magyar, with a clear edge, and his party has been polling quite comfortably ahead among decided voters, and that lead appears to have been consistent over a number of weeks. We've talked about it before, rather than just a spontaneous one-time shift. Now, it's not quite as straightforward as that, because when you widen it out to include undecided voters, the race does look a bit tighter, and that's important since a significant portion of the electorate still haven't made up their mind. And in elections like this, those late swings can be decisive. Some polls, particularly those seen as closer to the government, suggest a much narrower gap, but the direction of travel is clear here. After 16 years in power, Orban is facing a genuinely competitive challenge, with younger voters in particular appearing to shift towards the opposition in significant numbers. So going into Sunday, the opposition looks to have the momentum, and Orban is on the back foot in polls, but with a large number of undecided voters, the outcome remains very much open, and the question is whether this incident can swing the undecided voters in any way.
Yeah, as you said earlier, Katie, for many years now, Hungary has had this unusual position within Europe. What about the impact on Europe of this election?
Well, that's it. It's going to be an election that goes far beyond Hungary itself, because whatever way it goes, it's got the potential to reshape the country's direction and the balance of politics across Europe. So it could have a massive impact. So we'll start off with if Orban was to win again. So that would effectively validate his model of governance that he's spent the past 16 years building. Since returning to power in 2010, he's centralised authorities, reshaped institutions, and promoted what he's called an illiberal democracy, a system that critics in the European Parliament have described as a form of electoral autocracy. Another victory would likely embolden Orban's approach further, both domestically and internationally. Obviously, Orban has allies like Trump, who is supporting him, like Putin. Again, how will that embolden them and perhaps other leaders on the right? On the European stage, it would mean continued friction. Orban has been one of the most outspoken outliers within the EU, particularly over the war in Ukraine. He's repeatedly blocked or delayed support packages for Kyiv, putting him at odds with most European leaders, and also frustrating efforts to present a united front in the EU. So with that, he's maintained his closer ties to Putin, and Hungary is very much seen as an exception within this bloc. Now, if the opposition were to win, that could be arguably even more significant. It would mark the end of an era, firstly in Hungarian politics, and potentially signal a shift back towards closer alignment with Brussels and the EU, and it could mean a more cooperative Hungarian position on Ukraine. Normally they're the ones vetoing these policies, and a lot of the stagnation that we've seen from the EU has been as a result of Orban's veto. Therefore, it will be interesting to see whether support for the EU function in sanctions, in that loosening of tensions that's defined Hungary's relationship with European partners in recent years, could be shifted with different leadership, and what that could mean for Europe's overall position towards the war in Ukraine.
Yeah, there's a lot at stake. All eyes on Sunday. Katie, thank you very much indeed for popping in. Thank you. Okay, after the break, deadly overnight strikes in Ukraine and Russia as drone warfare intensifies and civilians bear the brunt. Please stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Primetime. Overnight attacks are continuing on both sides of Russia-Ukraine conflict, with civilians and critical infrastructure increasingly caught in the crossfire. Well, as drone strikes intensify and damage spreads across multiple regions, the human and economic toll continues. Here's the latest.
Ukrainian officials say 3 people have been killed in a Russian overnight strike on the southern city of Odessa, including a young child. At least 15 people were injured, with 13 taken to hospital. Among the victims were pregnant women and 2 small children. In northern Ukraine, attacks on energy infrastructure left more than 340,000 people without electricity in the Chernihiv region. Power facilities in 2 districts were damaged, affecting cities including Chernihiv and Pryluki. Ukraine's Air Force says Russia launched 141 drones overnight. Air defences shot down 114 of them, but strikes were recorded at multiple locations, along with damage from falling debris. Meanwhile, Russian authorities say Ukrainian drone attacks injured 8 people in the Black Sea port city of Novorossiysk, including 2 children. Residential buildings were damaged, though it is unclear if port facilities were hit. Russia says its air defences intercepted 148 Ukrainian drones over a 3-hour period. In border regions, including Belgorod, attacks have also caused casualties. And in the Luhansk region, a strike on a coal mine reportedly trapped 41 workers underground after a power substation was damaged.
Well, to break down the situation on the front lines and beyond, we're joined now by Alec Kasman, Director at Protect Ukraine Now, who's closely following developments. Alec, very good indeed to have you with us. Thank you for joining us on Primetime. I mean, some really terrible scenes there. Firstly, I just wanted to get your overall reaction to these latest strikes.
Hi, and thank you for having me. Overall, this is a continuation of aggression against Ukraine. Russia continues to hit the rear because they know they cannot achieve any meaningful progress on the front. The front is holding quite well. That's why they continue to attack the civilian infrastructure. Hundreds of drones every night, daily, is a normal scene, unfortunately, at Ukraine. Most of those drones are intercepted. Unfortunately, some of them do go through, like we have seen recently.
It's very interesting that you mentioned that the front is holding, that's why they're hitting the rear. Are we seeing a shift in tactics then? Is this why perhaps the scale of the drone attacks are increasing?
I don't think it's a significant shift or a shift at all. We have seen as many as 900 or so drones hit Ukraine over a 24 hours period of time. Again, this has been a strategy for a while. This is an attrition war, and Russia is trying to break down the spirit of the people in the rear, and they're not going to be successful, I can tell you that.
And we've of course seen the very distressing images of the appalling human casualties. The damage to energy infrastructure, how significant is that damage?
Of course, the damage is very serious. Fortunately, the winter is over, and it's going to be easier in that sense moving forward. Of course, there's a strong need to improve air defense around Ukraine, uh, and I believe there is some work that is being done right now. So I'm hopeful that the situation with air defense will improve. And of course, energy infrastructure needs to be more resilient, and there's some work that needs to be done in that direction as well.
Yeah, and Alec, on the other side of things, what do the reported attacks inside Russia, do you think, signal about Kyiv's capabilities?
So the technology used in this war is moving forward very quickly. From what we know, talking to people at the front, very often the cutting edge technology they use today could be obsolete in a matter of weeks. Both Russia and Ukraine improve on that technology. When we're talking about strikes inside Russia, there's nothing new about it. And of course, Ukraine continues deep strikes inside Russia. And first and foremost, they're hitting critical infrastructure that enables Russia to continue this war of aggression. But also, there's a strong message. The war is going to be at your territory as well. That this war is going to be Russian war as well. This is not sustainable if Russians don't believe that the war is their problem.
There's so much going on now, isn't there, in the world? The US-Iran conflict in particular. Do you think there is any sense that that conflict is creating almost a distraction for other actors, notably the US, to applying pressure to really bring the Russia-Ukraine conflict to an end?
It certainly does create a distraction. At the same time, it creates an opportunity for Ukraine to show their knowledge and experience. Today, Ukraine and Russia are the most capable countries in the modern warfare, drone warfare. And this is something that the US needs to learn from Ukraine. I'm hopeful that those lessons will be transformed. And as far as I understand, quite a few of Ukrainian military are right now in the Middle East assisting the United States and Middle Eastern countries against attacks from Iran.
And finally, Alec, you mentioned that thankfully winter is over, but unfortunately for too many families, the suffering continues. Is there any hope at all at this point or any sign of any de-escalation ahead?
Unfortunately, no. Russia doesn't have any incentives to end this war. The oil prices are up, and the Western countries are not applying enough pressure for Russia to end this hostility. And frankly, the only way to end this war of aggression is strong Ukraine, military capable Ukraine to defend itself. The only path forward is assistance in scaling Ukrainian success, Ukrainian drone manufacturing, and this is also an important opportunity, critical opportunity for the United States and Europe to learn from that experience. Ukrainians dearly for this knowledge, and they're ready to share.
Alec Kasman, Director at Protect Ukraine Now. We thank you very much indeed for joining us and for your analysis. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, after the break, we'll be checking in with our correspondents around the world for the very latest developments in their regions. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Primetime. Now let's check in with our correspondents around the world. In the UK, a series of wide-ranging changes are coming into effect today, impacting both household finances and workplace rights. Now, the reforms mark a significant moment for families and employees as the government moves to reshape key areas of support and protection. Here's what's changing.
Today marks a major shift in both welfare and workers' rights across the UK, with a series of changes coming into force from 6 April. At the centre is the scrapping of the two-child benefit cap, a policy that had limited support for larger families since 2017. From today, eligible parents can claim support for all their children under universal credit. That means families will now receive just over £300 a month per child in many cases, support that was previously restricted. Campaigners say the cap had been pushing around 100 children into poverty every day, and estimates suggest removing it could lift up to 350,000 children out of poverty. At the same time, millions of people will see a boost to their incomes from today. The state pension has risen by nearly 5%, with the full new rate now was just over £240 a week. Universal credit payments have also increased alongside child benefit and disability-related support, part of a wider annual uplift aimed at helping households cope with rising costs. But it's not just benefits changing today. For the first time, key protections are now available from day one of employment. Statutory sick pay will be paid from the first day of illness, removing the previous waiting period. Paternity leave is also now a day one right, meaning new fathers no longer need months of continuous service to qualify. Unpaid parental leave has been extended in the same way. And in a notable change, bereaved partners are now entitled to take up to 52 weeks of leave following the death of their partner. The government says these reforms are designed to modernize the system, strengthening support for families while improving protections in the workplace from the very start of a job. Zena Farizadeh, A News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
To Washington now, and a US operation reportedly rescued an F-15 officer inside Iran, with forces preventing any interference on the ground. Well, as tensions rose and the window for talks narrowed, A News' Ube Sharbanda reported from Washington.
Fresh details have emerged on the complex U.S. military rescue of a downed weapons systems officer in Iran following the shootdown of his F-15 fighter jet on Friday. President Trump told reporters on Sunday that while the pilot of the downed jet was rescued quickly during daylight, the weapons systems officer survived over 24 hours, evading Iranian Revolutionary Guard soldiers that were attempting to pursue and capture him. Over 200 U.S. Special Forces soldiers were involved in the rescue effort, locating the officer in a crevice in a nearby mountain. U.S. aircraft and combat drones launched a number of strikes to prevent Iranian troops that were attempting to capture the officer from succeeding. Trump said that the Iranian military used a shoulder-fired missile to shoot down the F-15. Two MC-130 special operation aircraft used in the infiltration of rescuing forces suffered a mechanical failure while on the ground in Iran on a makeshift airstrip. U.S. commanders made the decision to send in additional aircraft to extract the forces in waves. The rescue team spent hours on the ground. Once extraction was successfully completed, U.S. forces reportedly destroyed the disabled aircraft that were left on the ground to ensure that any sensitive equipment would not fall in the hands of the Iranians. And the window for negotiations is rapidly closing. President Trump gave Tehran a deadline of Tuesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to reach a deal, or else face the total destruction of their energy and electrical grid. Officials in Washington say that an operational plan is ready for a U.S.-Israeli joint military campaign that would target Iran's energy facilities once the green light is given by President Trump. U.S. officials told Axios that the Trump administration gave Iran several proposals in recent days, but so far Iranian officials have not accepted them. The U.S. and Iranian mediators are discussing a two-phase deal that would include an initial 45-day ceasefire in which a long-term end to the war would be negotiated. Opening the Strait of Hormuz and the removal of Iran's weapons-grade highly enriched uranium stockpile are the key parts for a finalized peace deal. I'm Ube Shibander, A News, Washington.
Well, meanwhile, in Tehran, Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has been in contact with his counterparts about a possible ceasefire with the US and Israel, while Tehran has categorically rejected Washington's 15-point proposal as illogical and impractical.
Reporting from Envelope Square in downtown Tehran, where a new billboard behind me says that Iran will keep the Strait of Hormuz shut to the transit of enemy's vessels. It is the 38th day of the Israeli-US war on Iran, and Tehran's top diplomat, Abbas Araghchi, has been in intense diplomatic contacts with counterparts from Russia, France, India, Pakistan, and Egypt in an apparent effort to end the conflict. According to news media, quoting the foreign ministry, Araghchi discussed with them the latest developments in the war, including US President Donald Trump's threat to attack Iran's civilian infrastructure. Terming Trump's rhetoric as explicit admission to commit war crimes, the Iranian foreign minister has warned against escalation of the war and its adverse effects on the regional and global economy. While the war has entered its sixth week, with Iran categorically rejecting the US 15-point ceasefire plan as illogical and impractical, Araghchi's contacts with Pakistani and Egyptian foreign ministers suggest that the diplomatic channel is still open. Both Islamabad and Cairo are in mediation efforts between Tehran and Washington to end the conflict, which is further escalating as the warring parties are trading new verbal threats and tit-for-tat attacks. Meantime, Iran is holding its control over the Strait of Hormuz, rebuffing US President's threats to open the strategic waterway by Tuesday. In the latest development, Deputy Foreign Minister for Legal Affairs, Kazem Garibabadi, said that Iran and Oman held an online meeting discussing secure transit of oil and gas tankers from the strategic waterway. Tura Shiralilu, downtown Tehran, Foreign News.
Well, uncertainty is growing in Iran about the risk of further escalation with the United States as it continues to weigh on daily life in Tehran. Residents in the Iranian capital reacted to mounting threats and uncertainty over what comes next.
Residents in Tehran are reacting to escalating tensions and recent warnings from US President Donald Trump, with a mix of defiance and calls for restraint. They criticize threats targeting infrastructure, saying ordinary people should not bear the consequences of political conflict.
They threatened a lot. Now the infrastructure they threatened, they first gave a 5-day deadline, then a 10-day deadline, meaning there's still no news. They haven't been able to do anything. We defend our country. It's not like we want to abandon our country. Now it's true that some people are with different coverings, hijab. I myself don't have a complete hijab, but I will never hand over my homeland to a people who are strangers to our country.
Others have taken a more cautious tone, warning against escalation and the potential cost of prolonged conflict.
We shouldn't say we surrender, but it shouldn't be such that, as they say, we want to resist at any cost. All the infrastructure that we have now would be destroyed, and we'd have to try for several years to get back to this level. We need to respond fiercely. It's not like that after all. Everything has its answer. But the best thing is that we go forward diplomatically and solve the problem, rather than wanting them to destroy all our infrastructure, or we damage them too.
The reactions come as Washington signals a looming deadline for a deal, while threats of further military action continue to raise fears of wider regional escalation.
To Kabul now, Afghanistan hosted the first meeting of the consultative dialogue between Afghanistan and Central Asian countries, with talks focusing on regional cooperation, security, trade and transit. Our correspondent Tamim Bahis has the details.
The meeting in Kabul brought together senior representatives from Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan for talks on strengthening ties with Afghanistan. Afghanistan's Foreign Minister Amir Khan Muttaqi said relations with Central Asian countries have improved in recent years, particularly in trade, transit and economic cooperation, and that the time is right to expand those links further. He said the aim is to create a broader roadmap for future cooperation in political, economic, security, and climate-related areas. Muttaqi also said Afghanistan and its neighbors face shared challenges, including security threats, drug trafficking, illegal migrants, and organized crimes, and called for closer coordination to tackle them. He added that Afghanistan's location gives it an important role in connecting Central Asia with South and West Asia, pointing to projects such as TAPI, CASA 1000, and the Trans-Afghan Corridor as key opportunities for regional cooperation. Representatives from the Central Asian countries also stressed the importance of stability in Afghanistan, the lifting of sanctions, and stronger economic and political engagement. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
Well, to Central Asia now, and Kyrgyzstan is preparing to make a key decision about its energy future. Authorities plan to hold a national referendum on whether to build a nuclear power plant as the country faces growing electricity demand and recurring shortages. Our correspondent Fariza Kalamazina reports from Almaty.
Kyrgyzstan is preparing to hold a national referendum on building a nuclear power plant. The announcement was made by First Deputy Chairman of the Cabinet of Ministers, Danyar Amangildiev. He says the government is already in talks with Russia's state nuclear corporation Rosatom. But for now, the project is still at an early stage. The focus is on developing infrastructure and training specialists. Officials say the country can only move closer to a construction decision after this groundwork is completed. At the same time, the interest in nuclear energy is being driven by a rising demand. Authorities say a nuclear power plant could provide a stable source of electricity and help reduce ongoing energy shortages. Over the past decade, the electricity consumption across Central Asia has been growing by an average of 3.2% each year. By 2030, demand is expected to increase by another 40%, reaching around 370 billion kilowatt hours annually. Kyrgyzstan remains heavily dependent on hydropower. During periods of low water levels, especially in winter, this often leads to reduced generation and electricity deficits. A similar referendum was held in Kazakhstan in 2024, where voters backed the construction of a nuclear power plant. The project has already moved into the implementation phase, with Rosatom as the general contractor. And now Kyrgyzstan is preparing to put the same question to its citizens. Fariza Kalimurzyna, Almaty, A News.
Turkey's foreign minister has held talks in Damascus, bringing together Turkish, Syrian and Ukrainian officials as regional diplomacy intensifies amid the ongoing war involving Iran, Israel and the United States. Our correspondent filed this report.
Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan was still in Damascus on Monday after taking part in high-level talks with Syrian and Ukrainian officials one day earlier. While in Damascus, Fidan met Syrian President Ahmed al-Shara and Syrian Foreign Minister Asad Hassan el-Shabaini, according to diplomatic sources. Fidan also took part in trilateral talks with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who also visited the Syrian capital over the weekend. Details of the closed-door discussions were not immediately made available. But in subsequent remarks, Zelensky said the three sides had discussed regional security, defense cooperation, and the broader implications of the ongoing regional war, now in its sixth week. He also said Kiev hoped to share its expertise in countering drone and missile threats, developed during Ukraine's years-long war with Russia. According to diplomatic sources, Sunday's trilateral talks in Damascus also tackled energy, infrastructure, and economic cooperation between the three countries. Fidan's participation in the talks served to underscore Ankara's ongoing diplomatic efforts to contain rapidly mounting regional tensions. Before traveling to Damascus, Zelensky visited Ankara on Saturday, where he held talks with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. The two leaders discussed expanded security cooperation, including possible collaboration on air defense capabilities and the protection of critical infrastructure. They also discussed joint gas infrastructure projects and potential cooperation in the development of gas fields, according to Ukrainian statements. Zelensky later described his meeting with Erdogan as productive, noting that both sides had agreed to deep bilateral coordination, including in the field of defense. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
To Georgia now, where President of Azerbaijan Ilham Aliyev has held a series of high-level meetings in Tbilisi during a state visit. Now, the talks come at a time of shifting dynamics in the South Caucasus, with both sides placing emphasis on cooperation and long-term stability.
President of Azerbaijan Ilham Aliyev has visited Georgia on Monday. The high-level talks focused on deepening bilateral ties and regional stability. A guard of honor was lined up as President Aliyev was received by Georgian President Mikhail Kavalashvili. In a one-on-one meeting, the presidents reaffirmed that Azerbaijani-Georgian relations are grounded in friendship, good neighborliness and strategic partnership. President Aliyev later met with Georgian Prime Minister Irakli Kobakidze, followed by joint press statements. Speaking to the press, President Aliyev expressed confidence in the future of bilateral relations, noting that the two countries consistently support each other's sovereignty and territorial integrity.
Our historical ties serve as a strong foundation for interstate relations. Today, as two independent states, Azerbaijan and Georgia are developing confidently. We always support each other within all international organizations as well. As the Mr. Prime Minister noted, we have always supported, we support, and we will continue to support each other's territorial integrity, sovereignty, and the inviolability of our borders.
Addressing broader regional dynamics, President Aliyev said a new reality is emerging in the South Caucasus, with opportunities for peace and cooperation.
Today, an entirely new situation is emerging in the South Caucasus, and the countries located in the region must not miss these opportunities. Unfortunately, peace, security, tranquility, and stability are being disrupted in various parts of the world today, resulting in bloody clashes, wars, suffering, and losses. A similar scene once existed in the South Caucasus as well. However, today the South Caucasus is already becoming a place of peace, tranquility, security, and cooperation.
Bilateral trade between these two countries have been increasing exponentially over the past few months. In fact, the figures related to the first 2 months reveal an element of progress. In terms of the figure, the annual trade turnover figure, that figure is estimated at $1.1 billion by Georgian side and around $880 million by the Azerbaijani side. Estimates differ, and there are reasons why they differ because of the import and export related classifications. At the same time, of course, the very cornerstone of the relationship between Azerbaijan and Georgia has been based on energy and connectivity. Azerbaijan is absolutely indispensable to Georgia's energy security. Around 85–90% of Georgia's gas consumption needs are actually supplied through Azerbaijani natural gas, while of course the first leg of the Southern Gas Corridor, Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan. Azerbaijan annually sends about 2.53 billion cubic meters of natural gas to Georgia, which is absolutely indispensable for this country, not just in terms of their immediate needs in terms of heating and so forth, but also as fuel for gas-fired plants of Georgia, being an important element of the wider electricity component of the energy system of this country. And of course, Georgia is indispensable to Azerbaijan in terms of Azerbaijan being able to export its energy resources westwards to Turkey and Europe. Relationship is beyond connectivity and energy. There are many other elements as well, and security is very important as well. At a time when 20% of Georgian territory is internationally recognized as occupied by Russia, at a time when Georgia is facing massive challenge coming from the European Union with EU discussions being suspended, the Caucasus element, the dimension involving this region and these three countries, Azerbaijan, Armenia and Georgia, is absolutely key to Georgian policymakers. But today's visit is a state visit. It's very important. Beyond ceremony, pomp and circumstance, there's also, of course, substance. And let me remind you that this is actually President Aliyev's, on the basis of publicly available information, of course, first foreign engagement after the 5th of March Nakhchivan drone attack, which of course signifies neighborly relations between these two nations, Azerbaijan and Georgia. Orhan Amashov, Elbrus Musayev, A News in Tbilisi, Georgia.
And we end our programme in South Korea, where an A News film crew is currently working on a new frontline documentary exploring the long-standing division between North and South. For more, A News' Anastasia Lavrina reports.
Greetings from Seoul, Republic of Korea. For the past few days, our A News filming crew has been working here on a new episode of Frontline, a documentary project focused on one of the most heavily militarized borders in the world. On the Korean peninsula, shaped by a conflict spanning more than 70 years, the legacy of the war has never been fully resolved, as the division between North and South continues to shape both politics and the everyday lives of millions. At the same time, South Korea has developed within the constraints of this unresolved conflict, building a modern and globally integrated economy while operating under a constant level of security pressure. The relations between Azerbaijan and the Republic of Korea have been also steadily developing across multiple directions, both sides working on expanding cooperation in political, economic, trade, educational and technological fields. The Korean side also expressed its appreciation to Azerbaijan for facilitating the evacuation of its citizens from Iran through Azerbaijani territory since the war started in the Middle East. At the same time, the Republic of Korea is contributing to demining efforts and supporting post-conflict recovery in the liberated territories of Azerbaijan. These developments come at a time when broader regional tensions, particularly in the Middle East, continue to influence global security dynamics, including here in East Asia. This is precisely what makes this documentary important, as it goes beyond the headlines to examine how a society functions under prolonged division, how stability is maintained despite uncertainty, and how the absence of a final settlement continues to shape both policy and everyday life. We will try to bring our audience closer to one of the most sensitive geopolitical fault lines of our time through on-the-ground reporting and direct engagement with those living this reality. Anastasia Lavrina, Bahruz Gadirov, Ilkin Mehtiev, especially for A News, from Seoul, Republic of Korea.
Well, that brings us to the end of Prime Time. Please do join us again tomorrow night, though, for plenty more news and analysis. And from all of us here at A News, thanks for watching.